A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus addressed this parable to those who were convinced of their own righteousness and despised everyone else. Two people went up to the temple area to pray. One was a Pharisee, and the other was a tax collector. The Pharisee took up his position and spoke this prayer to himself. "O God, I thank you that I am not like the rest of humanity, greedy, dishonest, adulterous, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I pay tithes on my whole income." But the tax collector stood off at a distance and would not even raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast and prayed, "O God, be merciful to me, a sinner." I tell you, the latter went home justified, not the former. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. The Gospel of the Lord.
For the last 2 weeks, we've been hearing about prayer. 2 weeks ago, our gospel was about the 10 lepers who met Jesus at a distance and prayed that they be healed. And then only one of them came back to give thanks for God answering their prayer. Last week was about the widow who nagged the judge, a parable about trusting and not giving up in prayer. And today we hear about the Pharisees and the tax collectors who go to the temple to pray. Growing up hearing that parable, I was always concerned where we sat in church. We always sat in the front, about 5 or 6 rows from the front of the church. And I would hear this parable about how the one who got mercy was the one sitting in the back. And so I started to wonder if God was saying the people who sit in the back of the church are the holier ones than the people sitting in the front. Now, in a round church, I'm not sure. I think you're all safe here because I don't know which is the back and which is the front. But I remember thinking that, and at the course of time, I was wondering, was Jesus addressing this parable to my family? And looking at it today, perhaps he was. More specifically, perhaps he was addressing it to me. Jesus is talking about people who thought they were righteous, people who were following the law. You know, as a young person, today we had the confessions of our second graders, and they made their first confessions earlier today. And I remember I was more concerned with the sins of commission, those sins I committed, the lying, the talking back to my parents, not doing my chores. I rarely thought growing up of the sins of omission, the sins of charity to neighbor, the sins of thinking about the neighbor whose husband had died and was I kind to her in her grief. I kind of saw myself as that Pharisee who was trusting in my own works and missing the point. The Pharisees thought he was righteous because of the things he did. We hear him say how regularly he comes to church, how he gives tithes on his whole income. There could be a whole homily in that one, but I'm not going to go there with you today. But how he fasted regularly. He thought he was earning salvation by the things he was doing. Contrasting that, Jesus talks about this tax collector who simply stands in the back, beating his breast, saying, "Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner." He knew he was undeserving and that God's mercy was a true gift. It wasn't something that could be earned. Now, over the course of my years, I've heard the prayers of the Pharisee throughout my life in various family members and extended family. It doesn't talk about tithing or fasting or things, but this is the prayer of the Pharisees in my family that I hear. Lord, thank you that I know how to dress when I come to church. Thank you, Lord, because I come to church and I'm quiet and I don't talk during Mass. I get here early. I'm not like the rest of those people who time and time again are late. Now, I know I'm not perfect, but at least I'm not as bad as those other people. I heard that a lot growing up in different ways with my family. That's the type of person, they're not praying to God. They're patting themselves on the back for everything that they're doing right, judging others by their standards, blind to where they need to change because they're focused on the sins of others. And I'll admit I was at one time like that, and probably oftentimes I'm like that again. The Pharisee didn't have any clue about what was going on in the life of the tax collector. All he knew was what he was told. Tax collectors are sinners. They hold graven images of the coins, and they shouldn't be trusted because they cheat. Did the Pharisees ever think maybe that's the only way that the tax collector could earn money for his family? He didn't have any concern about that because he knew better. He was righteous. He was focused on the law and himself. No concern for others in his prayer. So when we looked at the prayer of the Pharisees and tax collectors, the Pharisees ended up getting everything he asked for, which was nothing. He didn't ask for anything from God. He simply patted himself on his back, stroking his own ego. But the tax collector got everything he asked for, and that was God's mercy. Which one are we more like?